What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It's Wednesday, so time to go over my favorite trade targets this week. This one's pretty wide receiver heavy since most of the stud running backs were either on bye recently or have done really well, so you can't really trade for them right now. But even though it's wide receiver heavy, still got a few running backs to go over. So the top of the list, we have the Bucs wide receivers. Yes, I know that the Bucs have been pretty trash recently. And I'm honestly not even convinced that they're going to fully figure things out this season and go back to what they were last year. I don't really think that happens. But the insane inefficiency really just can't continue. Godwin has 4 straight games of at least 10 targets with at least 6 receptions in every single game since week 2, but he has 0 touchdowns. And he's got a 4-year low of just a 64% catch rate. So he's now the wide receiver 44 in half PPR scoring, 42 in half PPR points per game. I just can't envision him seeing 10 plus targets a week and then being outside the top 40 wide receivers in fantasy long term. He's getting super unlucky, and he would be my top priority this week. But right after him is Mike Evans. He's tied for 11th in targets on the season. He's got 3 straight games of at least 11 targets. He's at a 5-year low of just 8.8 yards per target, and he hasn't scored in 5 straight weeks, being the wide receiver 27 since week 5. These two are still very talented. I know, again, the offense hasn't been great, but it's an offense that when it picks up, we know exactly who the ball is going to. And even while they're still being bad, these two are getting double-digit looks every week. They're who the ball is going to when they make it into the red zone, even being on a bad offense. They're going to be good. They're going to be better than this. They're going to score at some point. Again, Godwin, no touchdowns on the year. Evans hasn't scored in 5 straight weeks. They're going to score a touchdown at some point, and when they do, people are going to start remembering oh yeah, Chris Godwin's really good at football. He shouldn't be outside the top 40 wide receivers. I think both of them are going to be consistent starting options the rest of the season, and the people that have them are definitely frustrated right now. After the Tampa Bay wide receivers, I'd be looking at the Steelers wideouts. We talked about them briefly last week, but they were on bye, so it would have only been a little bit. We obviously didn't talk about them in the running back wide receiver video and the favorite plays video, so it was only earlier in the week. But Claypool being traded away has such a massive impact on this offense. He had a 17.5% target share, and that's a really big amount to just remove from an offense, especially when, let's be honest, it was those 3 in the wide receiver core, and they're going to have other players rotate into that 3rd spot, but no one that's going to come close to 17.5% of the targets. We're taking a lot of those, and we're giving them to the running backs, to the tight ends a little bit, but we're giving some of them to Deontay and a good amount of them to George Pickens. And since when we look at Deontay, he already ranks 4th among wide receivers in targets, having already had his bye, and you basically stabilize that floor. It was already a pretty decent floor, but you make that floor even higher, and you unlock an even higher ceiling. That's a crazy amount of targets. And if you think about it, it's how does he not produce in fantasy if, number one, he's just a good wide receiver? I don't think I've ever heard someone argue that Deontay Johnson is not a good wide receiver. You've got to think Kenny Pickett is just going to slowly get better as a player. Remember, he is still a rookie. And then, like I said, you just secure these targets and you give him a higher ceiling each week. He's the wide receiver 51 right now in half PPR points per game, and he's going to finish top 5 among wide receivers in total targets on the season. I have to think that if he's going to finish top 5 in targets, and he's going to have that stable floor, and he's going to be using the red zone, he's not going to be the wide receiver 51 in half PPR scoring. So this is a good time to buy in on him, especially already having his buy as well. And I mentioned, those red zone targets. It's I don't maybe think people I don't know, I guess I don't view him as a red zone threat, but he has the most targets in the red zone on the team. He's got the most targets inside the 10-yard line. is their number one option right now, and Claypool was their number two option, so he's gone. And while, again, a lot of that is going to George Pickens, who we're going to talk about in a second, it's just securing Deontay's role and every week giving him an even higher ceiling. And just he hasn't hit that ceiling yet, but that doesn't mean he's not going to. They've also had some pretty difficult wide receiver matchups recently. Like, they've been in very difficult matchups at times this season. He's going to be better. You got to buy a low on him right now. And then again, Pickens. The usage is going up. We know the number one indicator of when a young wide receiver is going to break out is the second half of their rookie season. Knowing absolutely nothing else, if you just look at the second half of the season for rookie wide receivers, that's when they break out. It is just a very, very good indicator. And so if we combine that with the fact that he was a really high-end prospect, some people thought he was like the number one wide receiver prospect in this draft class, along with losing Claypool, just locking him in to all these snaps, a bunch of targets, he's not going to be the wide receiver 63 in fantasy like he is right now. I think rest of the way, you're using Deontay every week as wide receiver 2, and then Pickens, I think every week you can play him in the flex. I think he's a top 30 wide receiver rest of season. After those four, I think my next favorite is only for the teams, again, that have like 0, 1, 2, maybe 3 losses, like the really high-end teams. You're looking at those injured studs. So Jamar Chase and Jonathan Taylor would be probably the two I'd be looking at right now. Both of them are certainly a risk, right? I mean, there's no guarantee. I know he didn't go on IR, but like, there's no guarantee that Jamar Chase returns really quickly, returns to exactly what he was before the injury. There's still a chance that if you think you're buying low right now, maybe you're not. Maybe he isn't the type of player that he was before the injury. Maybe it's really like the NFL, the actual football playoffs, not the fantasy playoffs, where it really gets going. That's possible. But if you're a high-end team and you're looking to like really unlock the ceiling, well, anyone that drafted Jamar Chase and Jonathan Taylor is not doing good right now. Unless the Chase team got like pretty lucky, was really good before the injury, hasn't taken too much of a step back. Like these two, like obviously if you have, a first round and a early and mid first round talent and they miss time, that's going to hurt, right? So those teams are struggling. They need to win now. If you have a really good team with a lot of depth, you can afford to acquire them, keep them on the bench for the next, I would just assume that you can't play them for the next 2 to 3 weeks. Have that assumption in your mind. And if it, Taylor returns earlier, if Chase returns earlier, that's just a bonus. Think in your mind, I'm getting them back in 3 to 4 weeks. And if you're good with that because you think when they come back, they're going to be really, really good, I would trade for them because you're going to get long-term, a very big return on your investment. It's just, can you make that? If you're a 500 team right now, do not be trading for these two players. I'd really only do it if you're one of those higher end teams. After that, so after these top 6, I would say that it's the non-injured running backs. Again, not a lot this week to trade for, but I'd be looking at James Conner again this week, Antonio Gibson, and Jeff Wilson. Conner, we did go over last week. And honestly, I'm more encouraged now than I was last week. I thought last week was a really good time to trade for him, but I guess we weren't 100% what the role was going to be when he did come back. But he was efficient on the ground on limited touches, but he was relatively efficient on the ground after being super inefficient earlier in the season. He commanded 5 targets, was inefficient with those, but again, it's still 5 targets. He was involved in the receiving game, and he played 71% of the snaps, and we already know he's going to get 100% of the goal line work. Didn't score a touchdown, but had they gotten close, they would have used him. And so the results weren't there, which is good for us if we're trading for him, that he comes back and he didn't even do that great in fantasy, but we know at this point, given that usage, if that continues for the rest of the season, he's running back 2 every week. And one that, yes, has a lower floor, but all running back 2s kind of have a low floor, but with ceiling. He could go out there and score 3 touchdowns in any week. So, low floor like all the running back 2s, but he can win it for you, right? He's one of the running back 2s that if he goes off, it's for 25 fantasy points. Some running back 2s just don't really have that in the range of outcomes. And so comes back. People may be still concerned about the injury, still concerned about him being super inefficient, not being that great so far. I'd trade for him this week for sure. As for Gibson, his value does depend a little bit on the McKissick injury. It doesn't sound great for McKissic, but also we don't really know right now. Like there's a chance that he returns right away. There's a chance he returns later in the season. Right now, I'm under the assumption that it's going to be a little while before McKissic returns. And so you have Gibson as, pretty reliable pass catcher, definitely the best pass catching back between him and Brian Robinson. It's not even close. He's way better than Robinson in the receiving game. And he didn't have the game we thought he was going to have last week, but he did step in. He played all of the third downs. He was the guy they're going to go to on 2-minute drill, hurry up offense. The role was there. It just didn't really result in fantasy points last week. But if he maintains that role for, let's just say, the rest of the season, let's just say J.D. McKissic, he's got this neck injury. He's done for the year. Let's just say. I don't know that that's going to happen. But let's say it did. He's a running back 2 every week. And so because that's in his range of outcomes, you kind of have to value that a little bit higher in the trade market. We're not trading for him assuming that McKissic is going to miss the rest of the year. We're trading for him saying that could happen. And if it did happen, now I've got someone I can play at running back 2 every single week and feel good about it with a ceiling in the pass catching game. That's valuable. And then if it doesn't hit, you've still got a player that's being used at times, can be rotated in, isn't the worst play in the world. So I don't think the risk is super high. And if you want to take that chance and bet on McKissic maybe not returning, then it's a pretty high upside bet. Then for Jeff Wilson, like I said in the waiver wire video, he looked great. He looked really good. And it shouldn't be super surprising to us that he did, since he was already familiar with the system before. We know defenses are obviously just terrified of Jalen Waddle, of Tyreek Hill. They're not going to focus on the running backs. They have to do their best to contain these 2 wide receivers. And so it's just a really good environment for Wilson to be in. If he's going to look this good, like I said, earlier this week, if he commands 55, 60% of the touches, was used in the receiving game last week, there's another option that he can be a running back 2 rest of the season. Now, again, he only had 12 touches, so that's a pretty small sample size. But again, he looked good, and you really want pieces of this offense. I wouldn't say that I'm 100% certain he's going to be a running back 2 rest of season, but I'll say this, if he looks this good again, he gets around, that 12 to 13 touches again this week. Maybe he scores again. Maybe he just looks better than most are on the ground. You're not going to be able to get him next week. So it's possible that someone doesn't fully buy in right now. They're got the lucky touchdown. Mostert's still there. I don't really want this running back committee. I don't think that's the right way of looking at it. I really think the upside is there to be consistently running back 2 in your roster. And so I'd probably get him now, because if it happens again next week, people can be oh, I actually really want this. It's a valuable piece of my roster, and its price is going to go up. Then finally, I don't think it would be a trade video if I didn't mention the Sun God. Amon-Ra St. Brown has 2, I don't even want to say duds in a row. I guess last week was sort of a dud. The week before, it was 6 or 7 receptions for around 70, 80 yards. That's not really a dud. It was just a sort of a down game. But he now has 12, 9, 10, and 9 targets in the 5 games that he's played at least 70% of the snaps this season. Now, I don't think he's 100% recovered from the ankle injury, but he has played 95% and 97% of the snaps in back-to-back weeks now, again commanding 10 and 9 targets in each game. He's obviously better in a full PPR format, because that reception floor is really, really nice to have. But anyone with a chance at a 30% target share rest of the season needs to be someone that you're targeting in the trade market when they're underperforming. That is just a very simple model to look at, is look at the offense, look at their production in the past, and be okay, there is a very realistic chance that Amon-Ra St. Brown has a 30% target share rest of season. And even if he's not a player that's going to average 12, 13 yards per reception, that is a massive target share. That is a lot of receptions. He's going to get red zone usage. And if you look at the rest of this team, well, who else is it going to? Hawkinson is gone. The tight ends don't really command many targets. Jameson Williams is probably not coming back for at least another month or so. They don't really have any other wide receivers that are that amazing. It's locked in. And if he's going to get a little bit more healthy every week, and again, he's not like Swift. Like again, he's playing 97% of the snaps. Swift, that's a little bit more of a concern that he keeps not being used that much because he's clearly recovering from this injury and they don't trust that he's fully healthy. If they didn't think Amon-Ra St. Brown was at least close enough to fully healthy to play, he wouldn't be playing 97% of the snaps. So much more confidence in trading for Amon-Ra St. Brown than Swift. If you wanted to throw Swift in there, that's more of one with like Chase and Jonathan Taylor, where it's like, I would only trade for him if you're clearly up in the standings, you've got a good team, you think you've got like a 70-80% chance of making playoffs, and you want to acquire someone that in the fantasy playoffs, that's when they'll go off, that's when they'll be worth more than they are now. If you're 500, you're below 500, maybe a game over 500, we're not trading for risky players, and I don't think Amon-Ra St. Brown is a risky player to trade for. He's getting healthier, he looks fine, not 100%, but he looks fine, and the target share is absolutely there. So those are 10 players I would be trading for this week. The rest of season rankings are updated through week 9, and the week 10 rankings are up on the site already, along with the detailed rankings as well. I'll be back tomorrow to go over running back starts and sits, Friday wide receiver starts and sits, and then Saturday to go over my favorite plays this week. That, my friends, is this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button? How about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.